Mike, I just want to tee you up. You know, Harvard is such a node, a nexus point of all of these sort of, I don't know, globalist ops, clandestine ops, who knows, whatever you want to call it. You can articulate it better than I can. But walk us through your thoughts on Secretary Noem's letter.
Well, Harvard is the university supercenter of the blob. Harvard is very much not what it seems, but what's happening right now is something very seismic, just like when Trump went after USAID in the first month in office and sort of walked up to one of the meanest, toughest, baddest gang members in prison on day one. Trump, who has picked a fight with the universities because of the abject corruption of the entire university system, has walked up to the biggest, baddest of the universities with a $50 billion endowment and probably the highest pedigree of any university in this country in terms of how it's publicly known, and moved to totally decimate many aspects of their relationship with the U.S. government, which are vast. Harvard predates the founding of this country by almost a century, actually. What's happened today is a move to ban not just all student visas, so no new international students at Harvard. They're not allowed to get new international students in from this day forward, but in addition, all existing international students must transfer to another school. So they are not just not allowed going forward, but all of the existing international students will have to go to a different university. Now, the Trump administration has said this is because of non-compliance with federal government edicts. They gave several reasons. Anti-Semitism was one, harboring violence was another, non-compliance with DEI edicts was another, non-cooperation with efforts to reduce CCP and Chinese influence over the universities. They basically threw the kitchen sink at Harvard. And understand, coming into the Trump administration, Harvard is set to receive $9 billion in existing grants from the U.S. federal government. $9 billion of subsidies from the federal government. I mean, if you can just think of the scale of that money, a lot of people think that Harvard rose to its prominence because it's the best, it hires the best, it's got the strictest admission rates. Well, if you tried to create a university to compete with Harvard, you're not competing with Harvard. You're competing with the U.S. federal government, who is propping up Harvard and picking Harvard as the winner. The reason they can afford to hire the highest pedigreed scientists or have the facilities that they can offer and research resources they can offer to their students and faculty is because it's paid for by you, the taxpayer. So it's not a level playing field. They get a giant super boost. Now, the Trump administration last week actually killed $2.2 billion worth of that $9 billion, and then 5 days ago removed another $450 million. So Harvard is now scrambling into the financial space, into the private equity world, and into the donor world to try to frantically offset that funding. And then in the middle of this, the student visas are being revoked for international students and the transfers are being forced, which means Harvard's ability to recapitalize by going to foreign sources may also be greatly impeded, because a lot of the donations that come from foreign countries come from elites in foreign countries who make giant donations to Harvard, and then lo and behold, their sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, family mascot, and cousin's dog are enrolled at Harvard. It is a pay-to-play scheme when it comes to these sorts of contributions to get your children into places like Harvard and the Ivy League, and with less leverage to be able to offer to foreign countries because they can't guarantee a slot simply by paying their way in. This is yet another crisis for the university. I have a lot of thoughts on beyond that, but I can pause there as phase one.
We've been seeing going on with the resistance and opposition to President Trump. Obviously, the Center for Nonviolent Protests under Erica Chenoweth has been partnering with Democratic members of Congress to train their, paramilitary forces how to oppose President Trump. Can you sort of bring us up to speed how we've seen them weaponize against Trump 2.0?
Totally. Virtually every center, institute, and department at Harvard is weaponized against the Trump administration at every level, through their back channeling with intelligence, through their back channeling with the State Department, through their back channeling with the defense sector, through their back channeling with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, multinational corporations, through their back channeling with the NGOs. You gave the example of Erica Chenoweth, as well as her co-author of one of her recent books, Maria Stephan. The two of them are both associated with the Harvard Belfer Center. The Harvard Belfer Center is one of these heart of darkness places within Harvard that is tightly involved in organizing what they call nonviolent action, which is a total hoax term. Whenever you say nonviolent action, what they mean is the end stages of a color revolution where violent protesters who are not killing people with machine guns, but are rather throwing Molotov cocktails in police cars and breaking glass and setting buildings on fire, but they're not killing everyone as they do it. They're simply destroying everything and terrorizing everyone. They call that nonviolent action. Now, if I take a sip of water, I don't have to say that I'm nonviolently taking a sip of water. That phrase in and of itself connotes, at the very least, quasi-violent action, but it's all done through orchestrating mobs. And Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan, both at the Harvard Belfer Center, have been so-called scholars in this space. These are these operators who masquerade as being researchers. So they write white papers, they write academic literature on the science of how to organize a riot. How do you mobilize youth engagement? What messaging works? And then they also hold
Mike, we're coming up against a break, so I'm going to hold you there. I know the audience is going to kill me. We've got to go to commercial break. I'm sorry. Mike Benz, I think we still got you. If you can sort of walk us through, again, this idea that it's President Trump who is going after Harvard, that's victim blaming. He's the one that has been, the MAGA movement, assaulted by this institution and its kind for years. Pick up where you left off.
Harvard is not a university. It's a business. Harvard University is run by a 12-person board through the Harvard Corporation. The Harvard Corporation is what runs Harvard University. And the head of the Harvard Corporation is Penny Pritzker. Penny Pritzker was previously the chair of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. If that sounds familiar, it's because that's the organization that was run for 7 years by Bill Burns, the man elected by Joe Biden to be the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Harvard is essentially a foreign policy tool that merges financial markets with intelligence and statecraft to impact global policy, foreign policy, and the domestic drivers of foreign policy, which include running out a president who might oppose a foreign policy that interferes with Harvard's bottom line. Harvard invests deeply and has since the Cold War ended. Harvard has been deeply invested through the Harvard Endowment in seizing Eurasia from Russia, which puts Harvard directly at the center of Russiagate. In the 1990s, everyone can look up a great article called "The Harvard Boys Do Russia," or any deep dive you want to go down on a little place called the Harvard Institute for International Development and its role in privatizing and stealing the wealth of Central and Eastern European countries, and particularly Russia, during the 1990s. And if that name sounds familiar, the Harvard Institute for International Development may sound a little bit like the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. Harvard had its own USAID cell that got $500 million from USAID to be the long arm of USAID to loot the economic wealth of Russia in the 1990s in tandem with George Soros. Harvard was doing the dirty work of the U.S. government by putting its economists over there, by putting its liaisons over there, by building up a giant network over there, midwifing that process. And in return, the Harvard Endowment got non-competitive bids and private access at fire sale prices to the publicly held wealth of foreign countries. They did the same thing in Ukraine. They did the same thing all over Central and Eastern Europe. If there is neutrality with Russia, all of those assets and investments are threatened to go in the tank. Now, because the Harvard senior leadership and elite class has been completely merged with the CIA, the State Department, and the Defense Department, and USAID for 7 decades now, there has never really been an inch of daylight between what Harvard has called for and what the Bush family or the Biden family or Obama family called for. As I mentioned, Penny Pritzker. It was the Pritzker family in Chicago that spawned Barack Obama. What I'm getting at here is Harvard, through virtually every cell, from the Belfer Center to the Kennedy School to the Shorenstein Center to the Kennedy Center to the Berkman Klein Center, Every single one of these is chock full of programs that go directly against, in fact, set up whole training modules and global networks to stop the agenda of the very government that is funding them. These people, we people, voted for that government. We are not voting to send our dollars to Harvard any longer. And on that, just one last thing, because we mentioned Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan and these other mob violence organizers. They were tightly involved with the Tesla takedowns. So while Harvard is getting $9 billion of your tax money, these people are glorifying and strategizing, actually helping strategize the direction of what is effectively, and I don't mean to throw this term around so I can try to soften it, but something somewhat adjacent to domestic terrorism, arson, intimidation, destruction of private property, all for the political purpose of removing someone who isn't even the president from being able to advise the president. This is the sort of stuff that Harvard does because Harvard builds these networks. They serve as a CIA back channel, a State Department back channel in foreign countries so that when we topple the government of Yugoslavia and then those same financial and corporate investors gobble up those assets, Harvard endowment invests in those companies. So Harvard has these trainees and spawns and faculty members and professionals in their centers and institutes who organize these riots to topple governments so that the new government will be pliant and give everything to the corporations Harvard invests in. It's a giant racket, and we can't let them do that to our own country like they've done to dozens of countries around the world.